Now, good afternoon. I hope all of you had lunch. Good. So the judges are here to judge you, your work, and they are going to be on the content, on the presentation, on the quality, and overall impact. So it could be like if it is something which is innovative, probably it will get more marks. How many marks you're going to allot is between us. But we start with the first video, which is a novel all-nasal approach for lens-sparing vitrectomy in stage 4B retinopathy of prematurity. I have Dr. Simar Rajan Singh. Simar Rajan Singh, you tell me, I'll start your time. Timers, you should put it. 8th minute, switch it off. Okay? So the presentation will switch off at 8th minute.
285.
Yeah, it's here, whatever. Out of
Audio,
40.
Novel all-nasal approach for lens-sparing vitrectomy in stage 4B retinopathy of prematurity. The producers have no financial interest in the subject matter of this film. ROP is a disease which is inherently more severe in the temporal half. A large number of stage 4B ROP cases have extensive detachment of the temporal retina, which in some cases approaches the retrolentil space. A conventional approach to vitrectomy requires 2 of the 3 sclerotomies to be placed in the temporal half. In cases with stage 4B ROP, this endangers hitting the lifted temporal retina, and a more horizontal approach would necessitate a lensectomy, thereby taking away the advantages of lens-sparing vitrectomy. We propose a novel all-nasal approach with the surgeon seated opposite to the eye being operated. The infusion cannula is placed centrally at the 3 or 9 o'clock position for the right and left eye respectively. The other 2 ports for the vitrector and endoilluminator are placed on both sides of this port. The rest of the principles of lens-sparing vitrectomy remain the same. We now demonstrate the real-life use of this approach in cases with stage 4B ROP. This case was a 3-month-old child with stage 4 ROP in the left eye with progression despite confluent laser treatment. An all-nasal approach was attempted with the surgeon sitting on the right side. The first trocar is inserted at the 9 o'clock position. This cannula is used for the infusion. As the surgeon's hand rarely crossed during surgery, a centrally placed infusion does not interfere with the active vitrectomy ports. Another advantage of the central placement of the infusion is the support provided to it by the shallow nasal bridge of the infant. This prevents the cannula from flipping over and hitting the crystalline lens. The arrangement of the cannulas can be seen here from the surgeon's perspective, with the position of the surgeon while operating from over the other eye. Intraoperative OCT documents the steep detachment of the temporal retina, which would have necessitated a lensectomy if approached from the standard superior side. Vitrectomy is started with removal of the traction between the lens and the ridge, followed by ridge to periphery dissection. All the quadrants can be approached with ease. The ridge-to-ridge proliferation is then carefully segmented with cauterization of the new vessels bridging between the superior and the inferior arcades. An OCT after the release of the traction demonstrates a substantial reattachment of the temporal retina. The case is closed after a partial fluid air exchange and suturing the sclerotomy ports. The patient had a good anatomical outcome at 3 months after the procedure. The second case was a 4-month-old infant with extensive retrolental fibrosis on the temporal side with detachment extending into the posterior pole. The vitreous cavity was approached via the all-nasal approach. The pocket of fluid can be clearly visualized at the posterior pole at the start of the procedure. After clearing the core vitreous, Tramsin alone was injected to stain the posterior hyaloid. Posterior vitreous detachment was induced at the disc and extended up to the ridge. Further removal, especially on the temporal side, risked creating an iatrogenic break due to the densely adherent hyaloid and lifted retina. The attachment of the posterior pole compared to the preoperative image could be visualized on table, and the same was confirmed with microscope integrated intraoperative OCT. The case had a good outcome with attached posterior pole 6 months after the procedure. The third case was a relatively older infant who presented to us at 6 months of age with a falciform pole involving the fovea. All sclerotomies were placed on the nasal side. The nasal bridge supporting the centrally placed infusion cannula can be visualized here. The extensive detachment of the temporal retina approaching in the retrolental space is evident. A core vitrectomy was performed. In an attempt to open up the falciform fold, triamcinolone acetonide assisted posterior hyaloid removal was done. All maneuvers could be done with ease through this approach, right up to the temporal periphery. Intraoperative OCT demonstrates the release of the pole at the end of the procedure. Postoperatively, there was progressive opening of the falciform fold with reattachment of the posterior pole over 6 months. In conclusion, this novel all-nasal approach for lens-sparing vitrectomy with central placement of the infusion cannula appears safe and effective in the surgical management of select cases of stage 4B retinopathy of prematurity. With proper case selection, iatrogenic retinal injury and lensectomy can be avoided in many of these eyes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there any questions from the judges?
So did you use a pediatric set for this? I mean the
No,
Introcar
sir.
cannula system.
No,
and-
sir. As it is only in India currently, Alcon provides the shorter instruments, but they come with no trocars, no cannulas. I'm sorry. So they say that you'd make a direct entry in the sclera and go through that for the pediatric cases. But we believe in using the advantage of
Retinal surgeries.
the cannulas.
We have no-
So that is why we prefer a partial entry at the start and then pushing the cannula in and taking the trocar out so that the lifted retina does not get injured.
Any problem in giving GA because you have the intubation, so you're sitting on the
We
nasal-
did not have any issues with that because all these babies were intubated with a tube, no laryngeal mask airways, and the orientation was always, we did an pre-operative examination under anesthesia, saw the areas which were free of any anterior traction, and then decided on the approach if the nasal side was completely free of any traction. And the GA arrangements were made accordingly before cleaning and draping the baby.
In your last series, how many of your patients whom you planned lens sparing you had accidentally lens in
So
hand?
for now we have a series of 8 cases with more than
Okay.
6 months of follow-up.
None case required lensectomy.
One case
case,
required
okay.
lensectomy.
So that's about nearly 10, 10% of the patient do require converting into a
Yes,
lens.
sir, but
and all.
other series otherwise
you.
which report results of stage 4B with
4RB.
peripheral traction report up to 30 to 60% of rate of lensectomy if there is presence of peripheral traction.
And one last question is, all these falciform folds, how much is vitreous traction and how much is subretinal traction? There is a shortening or there is a
So this
cord,
is-
that cord without releasing, how does the retina go back?
So primarily we feel this is not subretinal because there is no
Okay.
reg component to it. It is a tractional detachment because of fibrosis and the vitreopathy.
Okay,
So nicely clearing that up and releasing the fold mostly helps in these
Fine.
cases.
we thank you so much. It was wonderful.
sir.
There is a really change in the sequence. We are going to call Dr. Krishendu. He has to go somewhere. What's your name? Rupak is. Rupak Viswas, yes. It's not the end. Next video will be by Dr. Rupak Viswas. It's not the end, it's the beginning of a new beginning or a beginning of an end. Total 40, yes. Over to Rupak.
It's not the end. It's the beginning. Treating macular hole is a day-to-day practice for a vitreoretinal surgeon. Addressing anteroposterior and tangential traction by classic ILM peeling is the key of success for macular hole surgery. But even in the best hand, this can fail and results in non-closure of hole like this. For larger holes, inverse flap technique is adopted for better hole closure than classic method. But in a failed case after peeled ILM, the option is to plug this residual hole with free ILM flap like this case. Few surgeons have tried with lens capsular flap, autologous blood, etc. In these cases, hole is closed, but SDOCT analysis shows it is filled with scar tissue only. Then a new idea came to my mind. If we can replace it with retinal tissue so that the gap can be filled with functional retinal graft. We have designed a series of Trifine of different sizes. Preoperatively, after measuring the whole size, we choose a Trifine of 100 micron larger size. After residual vitrectomy, a suitable area is chosen and retinal trephination done with gentle rotation. The graft is freed with a scissor and hold with the forceps at the margin with utmost care. The graft is placed over the hole gently with photoreceptor side down, then tucked with soft tip cannula. This is done under air and residual fluid is taken out. Donor site lasered properly, followed by gas tamponade. Curiously, I was waiting for the result and I saw the hole was closed with the graft and the well taken graft was having architecture somewhat similar to adjoining area. Now a question arised, is the graft functioning? To understand, we did multifocal electroretinogram, and wow, it's amazing. Amazing response at macular area showing significant macular spike. And we performed Humphrey visual field of 10-2 as well, which also showed near normal foveal threshold of 25 to 27 decibels. Till now, we have done 7 cases with minimum follow-up of 1 year up to maximum of 3.5 years. In this series, we have 70% cases with graft in place, vision improved in 40% cases and rest with stable vision. Though the number is small, but being a rare condition of primary failed surgery, number 7 is significant enough for establishing the fact. Literature says few surgeons have tried putting autologous retinal patch graft in these cases, but they have used larger size graft without refination, which probably acts as a scaffold. There is no end-to-end touch. In our method, predetermined size of retinal trefination done and tucked into the hole to have end-to-end touch. And we hypothesize that an aberrant regeneration takes place at this graft host junction. To prevent any hindrance into it, we did not use any viscoelastic agent or liquid perfluorocarbon. To show you the comparison, this is a multifocal ERG in a normal macula. Here it is a case of closed hole with classic ILM peeling. In this case, it is failed hole closed with ILM free flap, and this is our case of macular grafting. Please do see on a single chart. This encouraging multifocal ERG response indirectly proves our hypothesis of aberrant regeneration of neural connection. Also, automated perimetry supports this fully. The key of success here is harvesting exact size of retinal graft by trefination and not using any substance which can hinder end-to-end touch. A larger series can open up a new horizon of retinal grafting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rupak. Great innovation. How do you explain those 2 spikes in your ERG? So in normal you showed 1 spike, and in your graft you showed 2 spikes. Can you just go back to that picture? Because that's something very, I don't know whether that is a spike of vision. If there are 2 spikes of vision, no, it's in the end, when you're comparing.
Then tucked with soft tip cannula.
No. Just
Hypothesize
go ahead.
that we did not use any viscoelastic AT flap, and this is our case of macular grafting.
Go to the comparison form.
Please do see on a single chart.
This is the one. I just want you to explain this, that the grafting has
This one,
2 spikes.
this is
This encouraging
Hey,
multifocal
please
ERG
stop it.
response
Stop it
I just want
indirectly
Right.
proves
what I want to know
our
from you.
yeah. So, but that is actually one is at the foveal area. The other is the perifoveal area. So, which is quite far from the behind which the spike what you are seeing is a perifoveal.
This is only at the area of fovea.
Yeah. But
But
the
if
depression-
does that mean there are 2 potential vision present at that point? Because you implanted a piece of retina
yes.
and it has developed 2
No.
close by.
The other one is a perifoveal area which is giving another response.
But that response, if it was there, that's supposed to be at foveal area. That particular response is not there in normal retina
Correct.
anywhere. So if it is perifoveal, you should be flat. The green.
Yes.
The red spikes which you have shown, it suggests that there is another parafoveal or into the graft area you're developing another foveal response.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
I couldn't understand it
I-
anyway. If you
yeah,
can explain to it, fine. Yeah.
Can I? Yeah, this is a nice observation. So probably the area which is the graft area which is sitting there, so the response from one area and the other area may be different. So that's why we got it of, you know, two spikes of the different areas.
So in your series, I think now you have a bigger series.
Yeah.
And 7 cases, only 3 cases the graft was in place. So in your extended series, what is the success rate like? Because there's a learning curve, I'm sure, and
Yeah.
it's, you know, so yeah.
So if we, yes, this is, if you remove those areas, the graft anatomical success rate is almost near about 85 to 90%. I think
Now
our
your rate
last
has
1
improved.
year I have lost in 1 case.
So one is like you first measure the size of the hole, and then you take the trephination or trephine accordingly.
Yes,
That-
15% increase approximately, and then I
So
take the
you have
trephination.
all those trephines with you.
Yes, of different sizes of trephine is there.
And how big hole you would like? What will be the maximum limit you would
So
like? to
as of
do?
now, I have prepared till the inner diameter of 1200 micron
1200.
is available as of now, but we can make even larger also. We can
And
make
which is the area which you select for trephination? Like
Just-
because the thickness from the foveal center, and if you are taking a graft, retinal graft from periphery, the thickness will be different.
So this is what I have chosen because of the convenience of the surgeon. Is just above the superior arcade, so which is not within the macular area per se, but again it is just above the macular area, so that you can avoid the scotoma, and the cone concentration is not that, you know, less than the compared to the periphery. So what I have chosen is just above the superior arcade.
But the thickness of the retina in that area compared to fovea will be
Okay, is
different.
different. Is different.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rupak, for a
Thank you.
very
Thank you.
wonderful presentation.
Thank
May I have the next presenter, Dr. Manisha? She's going to present surgical options for persistent macular holes. Another similar topic. Please start her video.
65-year-old female patient who underwent a macular hole surgery with inverted flap presented with a type 2 closure of the macular hole and a vision of 636 N24 in the right eye. After staining with brilliant blue dye, an ILM flap was raised temporal to the previously peeled area around the macular hole. The ILM flap with an attached hinge was inverted over the macular hole followed by fluid air exchange and gas. This led to a type 1 closure of the macular hole with an improvement of vision to 618 N12. A 60-year-old female patient with a vision of 5 by 60 in the left eye and a history of macular hole surgery done elsewhere. An ILM flap was raised on the temporal side and not detached completely. Then a small bubble of PFCL was injected over the optic nerve head. The ILM flap was then completely detached and dragged over the macular hole and placed there. This was followed by fluid air exchange and gas tamponade, leading to a type 1 closure and a vision of 636 N12. Our third case is a 26-year-old male patient with a history of firecracker injury and a vision of finger counting at 1.5 meters with a large macular hole on OCT, surrounded with RPE atrophy. As the patient was very insistent for a surgery, a soft tip cannula was used to stroke the edges of the macular hole, leading to the closure of the macular hole with a decrease in the size of the scotoma and no improvement in vision. Our next case is a 48-year-old female patient with a history of blunt injury with a toy 5 to 6 years back and a history of macular hole surgery done elsewhere 3 months back. epiretinal membrane was peeled with shreds of internal limiting membrane and stuffed in the macular hole with mild stroking of the edges with a soft tip cannula. This led to the closure of the macular hole and a marginal improvement of vision to 5/16 N18. A 55-year-old male patient with a history of previous 2 macular hole surgeries comprising of inverted ILM flap and free ILM flap and a vision of 660 N18. A site was chosen in the right eye and laser photocoagulation was done. The flap of the retina was not completely detached. A bubble of perfluorocarbon liquid was then injected over the posterior pole, coming over the area of the retinal flap. The area in between the laser photocoagulation was then dissected out using a bimanual technique. The retinal flap was then completely detached from the site and then dragged over the macular hole and placed over it. Small amount of viscoelastic was then injected under the perfluorocarbon liquid over the retinal flap placed over the macular hole. This was then followed by fluid air exchange and a gas tamponade. On post-operative follow-up, the patient showed a minimal improvement in vision to 636 N12 and a closure of the macular hole was seen. A female patient with high myopia and a posterior staphyloma and a full thickness macular hole presented with a vision of counting finger in the right eye along with retinal detachment. The axial length noted was 30 millimeters in the right eye, and OCT showed detachment at the posterior pole with a full thickness macular hole. She underwent a macular buckle surgery, which is a good option for such cases, leading to a complete closure of the macular hole and an improvement of vision to 20/160. The other options in desperate situations can be the use of anterior lens capsule and amniotic membrane grafts, which can be used to close the persistent macular holes. There are several options available for the management of persistent macular holes. However, what is important is that we need to be persistent to close such holes.
Manisha, great work. Just one question. Anterior lens capsule will become opaque over time because it has cells. So does it affect the transmission of light?
Sir, apparently even in the immediate post-operative period, though we find that the macular holes have anatomically closed, I think things like anterior lens capsule or an amniotic, visual improvement is hardly there. So
These are desperate cases.
these are desperate cases, right? sir?
Okay. So, amongst the lot of procedures you've shown, which in failed cases is your method of choice?
I think, sir, inverted ILM flaps do very well.
Should be.
So
Easy.
if we, yes.
Very
So
easy.
if we get away
And
with
if
that.
if somebody has already done it, can you take it out from somewhere else and put it there?
So the first one
One
was
case.
a great experience, sir, when I did that hinge flap.
Hinge flap.
That patient had already undergone 2 surgeries and there was hardly any ILM available around the macular hole. The important thing in that surgery is that you are able to raise a huge flap of ILM on the temporal side,
Yeah, I know.
but don't completely detach it. So it behaves like a hinge. And then you just invert the whole of it on the macula, and that worked beautifully.
Perfect. Any questions?
So very elegantly shown. I had a question. There was a difference when you shifted the ILM, the transplant, versus the retina. In that you injected viscoelastic. So is there a difference between the ILM flap, because in that you didn't inject viscoelastic under the PFCL bubble?
So actually the first time I tried doing, if you would have noticed in my retinal graft surgery, there was another site which I had taken where I actually took a retinal graft. And in my first procedure or first attempt, when I placed it, when I did a fluid air exchange, that graft inadvertently got sucked in. So that's the time I again chose another site, and I realized that I need to put in something because probably this is not as sticky. And also because I'm not using a Trifine like Rupak, maybe the size was not so accurate to just snugly fit into the macular hole. So it was more like a free graft which was there. So just to avoid that, that's why I used a small blob of the viscoelastic, which just kept it in place while I did the fluid air exchange. Yes, I did, yes. And there I did.
Thank you so much, Manisha.
you, sir.
Can I ask Dr. Chakravarti to please come forward? Dr. Chakravarti is going to present to us on new window to posterior segment.
Very good afternoon. I'd like to present this video. In situations where there is a small pupil along with vitreoretinal pathology, proper visualization of the cataract and also the posterior segment becomes an issue. And when pharmacological dilatation fails, mechanical pupil expanders such as iris hooks, Malugin ring, the eye ring, or the recently introduced B-Hex hexagonal pupil expander comes into play. We present 3 cases of combined phaco-vitrectomy that were managed with the B-Hex. The first patient is a 60-year-old male having cataract with vitreous hemorrhage. We started the cataract surgery as usual, staining the capsule with trypan blue, and then as we proceeded with the phaco, the pupil started playing tricks. Meiosis forced us to stop and consider placing a pupil expander. We injected viscoelastic to form the anterior chamber, taking care not to overfill and push the iris towards the capsule. The B-Hex was placed in the anterior chamber and was easily placed to engage the pupil and ensure pupillary dilatation. At this stage, one has to be careful not to engage the capsular margin. Following this, we proceeded with the routine steps of phacoemulsification, and a multi-piece intraocular lens was placed. The hexagonal pupil expander we were using gave us a wide view of the posterior segment. It revealed a dense vitreous hemorrhage. On clearing up of the vitreous hemorrhage, we could see a large break and adjoining branch retinal vein occlusion. Laser was performed around the break and along the distribution of the branch retinal vein occlusion. This was followed by fluid air exchange and tamponade with C3F8 gas. During all these maneuvers, the B-Hex was stable in the anterior chamber, and on completion of the posterior segment maneuvers, it was time to remove the pupillary expander, which was disengaged from the pupillary margins and removed, completing the surgery. The next patient was a 56-year-old gentleman who had undergone a vitrectomy in the past for a diabetic tractional detachment, and he came back a few months later with an inferior detachment due to PVR. He was on tamsulosin, and as the pupil was around 3.5 mm, we decided to place a B-Hex for the surgery. The B-Hex was placed in the anterior chamber and the pupillary margins were engaged with the flanges. And then we proceeded with the cataract surgery. The good view provided by the pupil expander ensured that the phacoemulsification wasn't difficult. After completion of the phacoemulsification, the intraocular lens was placed and we decided to close the main wound with a suture. Next, it was time to examine the fundus. It was a silicone oil filled eye and the fundus was nicely visible due to the wide pupillary dilatation. We removed the silicone oil initially. The PVR that caused the inferior tractional detachment was in the extreme periphery, but it was nicely visible because of the pupillary dilatation that was provided by the pupil expander. We utilize the light pipe to dissect and release some of the peripheral membranes, and then the remaining membranes were removed with the vitreous cutter. We utilize the space between the margin of the intraocular lens and the pupillary margin that was engaged by the pupil expander to facilitate the peripheral dissection. Without this pupil expander, the peripheral dissection would have been almost next to impossible. On completion of the dissection, we created a retinotomy and fluid air exchange was done. This was followed by adequate laser and finally silicone oil was injected for tamponade. At completion of the posterior segment maneuvers, it was noted that the BHEX was firmly in its place and did not budge. It was now time to remove the BHEX, which was easily disengaged and removed. This is the post-operative Optus image at 1 month, and the patient had a visual acuity of 624. The third patient was a female of 34 years. She was a one-eyed lady and had undergone a retinal detachment surgery in her only eye 10 years back. This time, she came with a complaint of decreased vision for a period of 1 month. As she had no resources for the surgery, we decided to cut costs by using a rigid IOL. Hence, a sclerocorneal tunnel was made. She had an atrophic looking pupil, and we injected viscoelastic into the anterior chamber, taking care not to overfill and push the iris back towards the capsule. The BHEX was initially placed in the AC, and then the margins of the pupil were engaged. We decided not to do a stretch pupilloplasty as we were sure that the hexagonal pupil expander would easily expand the pupil, having used it in a number of similar cases. With the properly dilated pupil, phacoemulsification wasn't difficult at all. On completion of the phacoemulsification, the rigid PMMA IOL was put into the capsular bag, taking advantage of the long diagonal of the hexagonal pupil expander. The entry wound was closed, and it was now time to move on to the posterior segment. The fundus was adequately visualized with the hexagonal pupil expander in place. After ensuring that there was no vitreous, a retinotomy was made and fluid air exchange was performed. This was followed by adequate laser, and finally we put in 5000 centistoke silicone oil for tamponade. On completion of the posterior segment maneuvers, the BHEX was disengaged with an intraocular forceps, and it was easily removed through the side port. Even with all these manipulations, we found that the BHEX retained its memory very nicely. Patient currently enjoys 6/18 vision. To conclude, combined phaco-vitrectomy with small pupil could be easily managed in these patients, and the pupil expander was stable throughout the surgery.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chakravarti. Any questions?
So, were there any complications in any sort with this ring that you found in your series?
Not really, because we've done a lot more cases. These were, just the initial ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and actually, I graduated onto doing the combined surgeries after having, utilized BHEX in phacoemulsification. So, it was just a step forward in a sense.
So as you showed that from the aphakic part also you could manage to do certain procedures.
Yeah.
So was that also a disadvantage that in sometimes, the edge of the lens, is visible and it causes, sometimes the break is right there and, there are some issues with visualization, if it's too dilated with the BHEX And are you able to titrate that dilatation with the BHEX, or it's fixed?
No, it's not titrate. You cannot titrate it. But having said that, I like in this case, because it was right near the aura. I mean, like, this is not what I had planned for, but suddenly I realized that I could see through that part. So I focused through that part, and the dissection became easier. So that was a kind of a bonus for me at that point of time.
And any cases you use gas?
These cases, actually, the first case was gas was used. The second and the third cases, silicone oil was used.
So in any case, do you feel that, you know, over pupillary dilatation may cause some of the gas to come into the AC? I mean, any of those cases?
Prior to the, actually, you are talking about the fluid gas exchange, I guess.
After air fluid exchange.
No,
yes.
it didn't come out actually. It didn't come out.
Any particular reason for using 3-piece IUL?
3-piece IOL, well, no particular reason. One was a PMMA lens. That was
No,
yeah.
there was a you used 3-piece IUL in first and second case.
Yes, yes.
Any particular-
That was actually the patient chose because of the cost, you know.
okay, no particular reason.
No, sir. No, sir.
And these were valved cannulas which we were using for vitrectomy?
Mostly we use valve cannulas.
Because I think first 2 cases it was not with the fluid infusion line, and the third one there was an infusion line.
No infusion line, because these were in all cases infusion lines were there, sir.
No, before before starting phaco, they had put.
Might have been cut out, but
do
actually
you plug that? No.
No, sir. No, sir.
No. These are valve cannulas.
Yeah, these are valve cannulas.
And in the second case where you had inferior
yes, sir.
traction and detachment, did you consider any buckle, belt buckle?
Sir,
No.
generally, sir, we don't do, because nowadays with current 25 gauge vitrectomy, you can go right up to the periphery and dissect without leaving any trace of. And this patient, in fact, is doing good, and it's all more than a year since he's had his surgery.
And that 5000 centistroke oil,
yes, sir.
have you removed it, or it's
No, sir.
636 with the oil?
With the oil, sir, because she is one-eyed, and so we are still scared to remove it.
I can understand. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Dr. Chakravarti. Well, the next film will be from Dr. Nitesh Narula. He's going to present elusive vitreous sheath myopic hole with detachment.
Very good afternoon to all of you. About the elusive vitreous sheath, an important tip during vitrectomy to tackle myopic macular hole with detachments
Can you increase the volume,
to
please?
ensure a higher success rate. Myopic macular hole with detachment is a difficult entity to manage either by vitrectomy or by macular buckle. The difficulties encountered are because of the facts that these are extremely thin retina with poor contrast due to maculopathy. The ILM is extensively friable, and the necessary counter traction required during peel is absent. In these eyes, we are generally aiming for a large peel to cover the area of staphyloma, but most importantly, there is often vitreoskisis, and which is not identified, and the final sheath of hyaloid is not removed. This is what I call as the elusive vitreous sheath. This directly affects the success rate of the surgery. In this video, I highlight how to identify and pick the vitreous sheath off the retinal surface. I herein present a video of a 55-year-old one-eyed high myopic female with macular hole and macular detachment, which was 1 week old. Her best corrected visual acuity was finger counting 1 meter. A standard 3-port 23 gauge pars plana vitrectomy was done. After a basic core vitrectomy, the posterior hyaloid was stained with triamcinolone and PVD was induced using suctions from the cutter. A 360-degree complete vitrectomy without basic staging was carried out. After vitrectomy, a careful examination under high magnification showed the presence of fine trichroid crystal on the surface of the retina, which guided to the fact that there was still some hyaloid attached to the retinal surface. This is how an elusive vitreous sheath was identified. A diamond-dusted membrane scraper was used to gently scrape these crystals off the retinal surface. In this attempt, the edge of the hyaloid was entrapped with the diamond duster, and slowly this sheath was separated from the surface of the retina. Subsequently, the ILM was stained using brilliant blue green, and an arcade to arcade 360-degree ILM peeling was carried out gently. A fluid air exchange was done and silicone oil was injected at the end of the procedure. Post-operatively, the macular hole closed, the macular detachment regressed, and the vision improved in best corrected visual acuity to 636 parts.
Ritesh, wonderful. Just want to know, there was a lot of geographical atrophy around that, and still you had good vision improvement. How do you explain this?
So it's a patient of posterior staphyloma high myope with myopic maculopathy, and the main criteria for taking up patient for surgery was that she said this was a one-eyed patient, very clear in history that 1 week back I was seeing well, at least decently well to carry on her activities, and had suddenly dropped in vision to finger counting 1 meter. Definitely there is some island of a useful retina. Had it been an old vision loss, probably I would not have touched. A 1 week significant drop in vision in a one-eyed, I thought it's a useful chance to take to close this macular hole.
Have you used the finesse for this purpose? I mean, instead of the DDS?
Subsequently, this is a video which I had obviously submitted a year back. Post that I have used finesse loop to identify this sheath and pick it up. But in very thin retinas, I still have more confidence using a diamond dusted scraper vis-a-vis finesse loop. I find finesse loop can be a tad more traumatic to the retinal surface. You can have a little more chance of, if your amount out is not titrated well, you can still have a little more chance of injuring the retina. Yeah, but still I feel diamond dusted a little safer on a extremely thin retina.
And did you use PFCL in this case? Or
no, there's no
okay.
PFCL.
So the detachment didn't hinder you, like the counter traction was not there. So
no, I generally prefer peeling without a PFCL even in myopic macular hole detachment.
And you didn't drain before?
Sorry?
Staining. You didn't drain the detachment?
I don't generally drain it from the whole area. I prefer not to do that.
Fluid air exchange you did through the hole only?
Just the start of the fluid air exchange. Subsequently, I don't go near the whole area. I generally prefer my fluid air exchange being completed at
you
the
don't
disc.
You didn't make any other retinotomy?
No, I
for
generally
drainage.
let the fluid percolate from the macular hole towards the disc and drain at the disc. I don't want any maneuvers to a bad RP specifically happening close to the edge of my macular hole. This is mainly my reason not let RP get further damaged in that area.
So, any particular reason for using oil versus gas? Like
so one-eyed was my predominant reason. The other eye was not there. The patient was already visually quite uncomfortable. I wanted her to see faster. With gas, I would have to again wait for 6 weeks for her to get mobile again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good. Again, there is a change in the order. Request because Dr. Chakravarti has to go somewhere else. Dr. Meena Chakravarti will be presenting her video on tackling a bug named A. Bowmanni Man 2. I don't know. I have first time heard about this bug.
Acinetobacter bowmani.
Oh, Bowmanni. Okay.
Second last.
This is last, but what's the number?
It is 101.
Acinetobacter baumannii is a gram-negative cocobacilli classified under the family Moraxulaceae. It is an ubiquitous organism and is a normal flora of the skin, perineum, and oropharynx in 20 to 25% of healthy
You
subjects.
just make the audio a little bit.
In the last few years, this ubiquitous organism has emerged as a quintessential nosocomial bad bug, having the distinction of being a red alert pathogen and a member of the serious multi-drug resistant escape group of organisms. The antimicrobial resistance of Acinetobacter is a cause of grave concern, as the organism is multi-drug resistant, exhibiting only a narrow range of sensitivity. The organism is sensitive to third and fourth generation cephalosporins, imipenem, cotrimoxazole, and fluoroquinolones. In this video presentation, we would like to highlight the difficulties encountered in managing postoperative endophthalmitis caused by pan-drug resistant Acinetobacter baumannii. All patients had a subacute onset of infection and presented 70 to 30 days after the cataract surgery. The visual acuity at presentation ranged from hand movements to 6/60. Common presenting features included hypopyon, either chalky white in color or dirty brown colored, as well as presence of sequestered colonies in the capsular bag. The fourth case presented with severe vitritis and macular edema, partially responsive to steroid therapy. All patients underwent vitreous biopsy with intravitreal injection of vancomycin and ceftazidime. The initial cultures as well as subsequent cultures yielded a growth of Acinetobacter baumannii, sensitive to ceftazidime, ceftriaxone, cefperazone, cotrimoxazole, and piperacillin and tazobactam. Since an adequate response was not obtained even after 48 hours of vitreous biopsy and intravitreal antibiotic injection, 23-gauge pars plana vitrectomy with repeat intravitreal injection of ceftazidime was performed. Since one of the patients presented with a severe and recurrent vitritis, pars plana vitrectomy, PVD induction using triamcinolone acetonide, and intravitreal ceftazidime injection was administered. All patients had multiple recurrences at varying intervals ranging from 2 weeks to 6 weeks, necessitating several intravitreal ceftazidime injections. In 3 eyes, IOL explantation was performed and sent for culture and sensitivity along with the capsular bag. The capsular bag in all cases showed whitish, sequestered colonies of the organism. All the patients were followed up for 8 to 12 months. The first case at final follow-up had a visual acuity of 3/60, corneal decompensation, a stable attached retina, and a normal intraocular pressure. The second patient had a final corrected vision of 6/18 with FAK correction. Case 3, who presented with corneal infiltrate superiorly, he leaving behind a corneal opacity and a best corrected visual acuity of 6/24. Case 4 developed an epiretinal membrane for which a repeat vitrectomy with epiretinal membrane peel was performed. Since the patient had persistent postoperative hypertony, silicone oil tamponade was also carried out. At 8 months after presentation, the patient had a corrected visual acuity of 6/60 and an intraocular pressure of 10 millimeters of mercury. Acinetobacter baumannii postoperative endophthalmitis is a serious condition which is recalcitrant to treatment, exhibiting multiple recurrences necessitating several intravitreal injection of antibiotics, vitrectomy, and IOL explantation. A diagnosis of Acinetobacter baumannii endophthalmitis should be considered in all patients presenting with subacute or chronic intraocular inflammation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meena. Wonderful. When do you think silicone oil has to be used, or is it like you have any particular indications that if there is a retinal involvement you have done and you want to put silicone oil preferentially?
So the last patient for whom silicone oil was used had gross hypertony.
Okay.
So the oil was used mainly to form the globe and maintain the intraocular pressure.
And then when do you remove this silicone oil?
The silicone oil is still there.
Still
and
there. Any other questions?
Did you use any oral or intravenous antibiotics as well?
Fortunately, this microbe is was sensitive to cotrimoxazole, which is available as Bactrim DS, and all these patients were on Bactrim DS for a period of ranging from 7 to 14 days.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, so if we go back to the next on the list is Dr. Mohit Dogra. He's going to present to us minimal invasive subretinal biopsy for primary VR lymphomas. Dr. Mohit Dogra, please. Quiet. Don't worry. Everything is insured in this hall.
Primary vitreoretinal lymphoma is one of the greatest masquerade syndromes. It can present as vitritis, subretinal mass lesion, and other presentations which can mimic uveitis. It appears in waxing and waning phase, thus difficult to diagnose. Classical appearance of leopard skin is seen where multiple hyper and hyperpigmented lesions are seen, which are better appreciated on autofluorescence imaging. As confused with uveitis, ophthalmologists initiate corticosteroids, which are lympholytic and further delay diagnosis. Even steroid leads to disappearance of B cells prior to vitreous biopsy. Biopsy is the gold standard for diagnosis, but vitreous biopsy often comes out to be negative, while retinal biopsy is cumbersome and has its own complication rate. PVRL cells are located mostly anterior to Bruch's membrane, as shown in this OCT image, invading vitreous, retina, subretinal space, and space between RPE and Bruch's membrane. Thus, access to subretinal space logically appears to improve the cytological diagnosis. A 66-year-old male was undertaken for diagnostic vitrectomy. After making sclerotomy ports, vitreous biopsy was taken under air at 600 cut rate per minute, followed by diluted vitreous sample, which was taken by infusion on, following which core vitrectomy was completed after posterior vitreous detachment. Site of minimally invasive subretinal biopsy was chosen away from the macula. Retinotomy was made at the edge of the lesion, and 25 gauge soft tip was inserted in subretinal space and moved in all directions to increase the yield. Fluid air exchange is done and endolaser is applied to the retinotomy site. Ports are sutured. 36-year-old female is undertaken for diagnostic vitrectomy. The vitreous biopsy is taken as per steps previously highlighted. A retinotomy is made at temporal edge of large subretinal lesion using 25 gauge soft tip. Minimal invasive subretinal biopsy is taken. The tumor cells are displaced using this 25 gauge soft tip towards the retinotomy site. These repeated movements help in debulking of the tumor cells and their aspiration into the soft tip. Fluid air exchange followed by laser around the retinotomy is done. Case 3 highlights the use of intraoperative OCT in minimally invasive subretinal biopsy. IOCT shows CME and location of lymphoma cells between RPE and Brooks. As this lesion is at posterior pole, we choose another lesion for MISB located superiorly. IOCT shows the lymphoma cells going into the lumen of soft tip cannula. In pre and post biopsy OCT picture, we can see flattening as well as decrease in the width of the lesion. Endo laser is done. Biopsy from vitreous mirror showed scanty lymphocytes while subretinal aspirate shows plenty of lymphocytic cells. We had 7 cases of subretinal biopsy, of which 2 were diagnosed on vitreous, while all 7 cases showed lymphocytes in minimally invasive subretinal biopsy. All 7 cases were CD20 positive, while 2 cases had CNS involvement. Subretinal biopsy helped in early diagnosis and reduced delay in the initiation of treatment.
Thank you, Mohit. Any questions? We can take any question from the audience. Dr. Naresh is here with us. No question?
So in the first 2 cases, sir, in which I made retinotomies, I put in SF6 20% at the end of surgery. In the third case, which was very superior, in which I used MIOCT, there was no fluid at the end of it. I left the patient under air. So SF6 20% in 2 and just air in the third one.
The size of the soft tip,
the size is standard, sir. So I do a 25 gauge pass
no, the normal size. You don't cut it or
no. So typically, because it's supposed to go underneath, if we cut it short, it kind of so this is actually based on the passive capillary action of the soft tip
then
and the
still you have to kind of maneuver those cells into it.
Again, sir, depends whether the first case had minimal cells which were flat and spread out. The second case had like a heap. So if there's a heap, then we might need to, then we can, because that the idea is to increase the yield.
Okay.
Most of the time, 50% plus cases, just a diagnostic vitrectomy is negative. And after a vitrectomy is negative, you try and convince the patient again, if a suspicion is high, ki ab hum kuch aur karenge, is a little bit difficult to do.
So how do you prevent dilution of the sample? Like, you are taking out the cells and already you've done a vitrectomy and it's on fluid, right?
Yeah, so the subretinal aspirate actually is very difficult to dilute, sir, so when we put the soft tip in, it's actually just not, it's not attached to the machine on active suction. It's actually attached to a 2 cc syringe with the plunger out, and the soft tip goes straight into the subretinal space. By passive capillary action, those cells get sucked up into the hub, into the bore of that 2 cc syringe, and when we get it out like that. So that is actually the most undiluted specimen, and it comes straight from the source from where the cells are actually breaking through. Also, with the cutter, no matter how much we decrease the cut rate, it'll actually chew away the cells. Even a 600 cut rate, with the cutter, a vitreous specimen from a cutter will not give you as many viable cells. Here you aren't cutting the cells. You're just passively aspirating the cells, and if the friction is not that much, it's unlikely that the cells will disintegrate. So more cells from the source, passively taken and undiluted in the passive suction of the 2 cc syringe.
In these cases, is there any IL-6, IL-10 ratio?
Yeah, so I didn't put that in. So all of these, we're lucky enough at PGI to have an in-house DBT lab which does IL-10, IL-6 ratio. Since the past 1 year, we've also been doing the mid-88 mutation, and we also do CD20s and a whole lot of other markers, including flow cytometry for gamma and lambda heavy chains. I haven't put that here. That's actually, this has been sent for publication elsewhere. It was just to highlight the technique and not the diagnostic side of it.
Thank you, Mohit. Wonderful. The next presenter is Dr. Preeti. She's here? Yeah. She's going to speak on MIROP, minimally invasive retinopathy of prematurity surgery.
A new surgical technique called MEROPS or minimally invasive ROP surgery. Stage 4 ROP with posterior disease requires lens sparing vitrectomy. Some stage 5 require lens sparing vitrectomy and some lensectomy with vitrectomy. Peripheral traction is difficult to relieve without sacrificing the lens. In intermediate cases with partial detachment with a fibrovascular stalk extending anteriorly, stage 4 progressing to stage 5, or cases with peripheral localized TRT can be managed by MEROPS. Surgery for ROP usually does not involve complete vitrectomy. In MEROPS, the vitrectomy is much more limited than usual, where the focus is to relieve only the relevant anteroposterior traction with minimal intervention. A limited vitrectomy is done around the stalk and the stalk is cut to relieve traction. This is a demonstrative case of stage 4A ROP where a limited vitrectomy is done around the stalk and the stalk is cut using scissors. We face minimal intraoperative bleeding in this case. Another demonstrative case of stage 4A ROP where it's important for us to note that MEROPS can be performed even with a single port. The fibrovascular stalk was cut and also separated from the hyaloid all around using scissors. Here we can clearly see a 360-degree separation of the stalk from the anterior hyaloid with the retina in the background. A case of stage 4A ROP where both the vitrectomy and stalk cutting was managed using scissors. Another case of stage 4A ROP where both the vitrectomy and stalk cutting was managed using cutter. In this red cam image, we can clearly see relief of all traction and reattachment of the posterior pole in the postoperative period. This is a case of peripheral traction in ROP. Here it is important to note that the active port need not be at the usual supratemporal or supranasal site in MEROPS. It can be made at any point which is most convenient for us to access the fibrovascular stalk. In this case, it was made superiorly. That it requires limited vitrectomy. Not all cases require infusion. Single port vitrectomy is possible. It reduces the operative time. It is a lens sparing technique with reduced risk of cataract. There is minimal bleeding or risk of iatrogenic breaks. However, there is a theoretical risk of pulling on the retina and tearing it while handling the fibrovascular stalk, but fortunately we have not faced any such complications in our practice. In our hands, it has been a reasonably successful technique in preventing progression to stage 5 and in achieving retinal reattachment. Thank you for watching.
Thank you so much. There is a question.
So you did not use any trocar cannula system for your surgeries?
No, sir. It's basically to gain some space. So a direct entry with an MVR was made. However, it was not a 20 gauge entry. the largest dimension of the MVR is not allowed to pass through. So it's just that a sharp single smooth entry was made with an MVR, and then we use 23 gauge instruments to do the surgery.
Any viscoelastic that you injected in that single port vitrectomy, like the single port
Yes,
surgery?
without infusion, when we just used scissors, it was a single port surgery. In some cases, yes, there was not much of hypotony or vitreous prolapse because there's minimal manipulation done and only the fibrous stalk is taken care of with a limited vitrectomy around it. So we did not face much of hypotony in any of these cases.
And no complications in any case?
So as of, we only have a few cases, but as of now, we haven't faced any major complications requiring these surgeries.
Dr. MPS's hands.
I think 23 gauge MVRs are also available.
So at our center, the routine MVR that we have is a 20 gauge with which we made an entry, and it's not a complete entry though, so
But
it's much smaller than a 20 gauge entry.
But you do need a larger entry so that you, without a talker, you're getting inside.
Yes, sir. Without a cannula, we're
So
getting
then
an
there
entry
is going to be a little gap. So that's
It's a
understandable.
slightly larger entry
But you
than a
cannot, you know, have a 23 gauge MVR getting into a 23 gauge instrument will be difficult, because as soon as you come
It's
out,
not as smooth
it
as-
shrinks. So that shrinkage won't let the 23 gauge. So you must have a larger,
larger entry to
yes.
get in, yes.
But it's a very, very innovative thing. Very nice. Any comments from the audience? I see some big ROP surgeons sitting in front of me. You know, that. Okay, yeah. Well, this is a very good question. I mean, if there is a traction, just put a buckle.
So there are there are 4B cases also which have been handled like this. 4A.
4A, these are
Yes,
four.
so most of them have been posterior traction. The transvitreal traction is the only component that we've handled here.
Fine. Thank you so much. The next speaker is Dr. Narayanan. Instead of him, Dr. Jignesh is going to speak. He's going to talk on a unique way of managing Coates maculopathy, intraretinal macular cyst aspiration. Over to Dr. Jignesh, please.
Unique way of managing Coates maculopathy, intraretinal macular cyst aspiration. In this video, we try to highlight important surgical steps in the management of a macular cyst aspiration. The video takes the viewer through the unique way of a Coates maculopathy management, demonstrated the first time to the best of our knowledge. 15-year-old boy referred to the retina service in a view of retinal detachment in the right eye since past 15 days. Multiple telangiectatic vessels with exudation with a massive macular edema was noted on fundus examination. Diagnosis of a Coates disease was made in the right eye. Vision at presentation was 20/600 in the right eye. OCT demonstrated large intraretinal cyst at macula. Trial of intravitreal bevacizumab and a triamcinolone was given. Focal laser was also tried in the right eye, but there was no clinical improvement. Hence, surgical removal of a cyst was planned in the right eye. Left eye examination was within normal limit. Here we can see the fundus photo of the right eye. Multiple areas of a telangiectasia, also the areas of hemorrhage and exudation. Fundus fluorescein angiography of the right eye shows a hyperfluorescence due to the leakage from abnormal telangiectatic vessels. OCT passing through the macula shows a large cyst of more than 1000 microns. Fundus examination of the left eye was within normal limit with a distant visual acuity of a 20/20. 325 G pars plana port made at a 4 mm distance from the limbus. Here we can see exudation and a telangiectatic vessels in the nasal part of the retina and at the posterior pole. Triamcinolone assisted pars plana vitrectomy is carried out. Posterior vitreous came out easily as a sheet, as we can see here. 38G needle is inserted through the superotemporal quadrant. 38G needle is inserted temporal to the fovea into the cyst. Intraretinal cystic fluid is aspirated through the 38G needle and a sample was sent for the biochemical analysis. Endolaser is done over abnormal telangiectatic vessels. Periphery of retina is examined for any breaks. Fundus photograph of the right eye at 1 week shows attached retina with a laser scarf over abnormal vessels. Clinically, there was a massive reduction in a macular edema with a visual acuity improvement of a 20 by 320. OCT passing through the macula shows gross reduction in a cystic height. We are eagerly waiting for the laboratory results. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ignish. Any questions? I mean, draining coats exudation.
So was the fluid thick? I mean, could you drain the fluid through that 38 gauge
Yes.
cannula? It was possible.
Yes.
Okay. And you
So
left it on
initially
air
we
or
had-
gas?
Initially, we attached a tuberculin syringe and we aspirated 200 microliter of fluid, and that fluid we sent for the biochemical analysis and histopathology. And remaining fluid, then we attached a suction cannula and we aspirated whatever is possible.
Actively.
Actively.
Okay. And did you leave it on air or gas?
Air.
Air.
What was the kind of improvement you are saying? Like,
Clinically, actually, initially we thought it's a macular edema, and we injected a patient with first Avastin and then IVTA, but there was no improvement. So in one of the OCT we thought that it's a intraretinal cyst, it's not a SRF.
Because his name is there in the office.
So that's why we planned for the cyst aspiration.
Okay.
The next speaker is, next presenter is Dr. Ramandeep Singh. Ramandeep is going to speak to us or represent his work on clinical utility of intraoperative OCT in various forms of posterior segment pathology. Dr. Ramandeep.
375.
Various posterior segment pathologies. Intraoperative OCT is a novel technology whose clinical utility is still being explored in various ophthalmic pathologies which require surgical management. Intraoperative OCT has the ability to provide real-time visualization of the ocular anatomy, and the same is displayed to the surgeon on head-up display as well as the eyepiece of the microscope. This video depicts the clinical utility of microscope-integrated intraoperative optical coherence tomography in various vitreoretinal pathologies during surgical procedures. Although there are multiple benefits of intraoperative OCT during a surgical procedure, for the benefit of understanding the clinical utility of intraoperative OCT, we have divided these cases into 4 groups. The group 1, where intraoperative OCT acted as an alternative to a surgical adjuvant such as triamcinolone, or dye or a surgical instrument. In Group 2, where intraoperative OCT is used to assess surgical endpoint. In Group 3, where intraoperative OCT acted as an informative tool, necessitating additional surgical maneuver. In Group 4, where intraoperative OCT was used as a diagnostic tool in pediatric patient during examination under anesthesia, as well as during simple buckling procedures. In diabetic tractional retinal detachment, intraoperative OCT aids in finding the safe plane to begin fibrovascular membrane dissection. Real-time visualization of the cutter in relation with the retina prevents inadvertent trauma to the underlying retina. Foveal assessment at the end of the dissection with the intraoperative OCT ascertains complete membrane removal. While tackling retinal membrane, intraoperative OCT clearly delineates the ERM as well as the cleavage site to perform dialysis surgery. At the end of the surgery, foveal scan reveals completeness of the procedure as well as intraoperative anatomical alterations seen as intraretinal corrugations. Intraoperative OCT can act as an informative tool necessitating additional surgical maneuver like removal of residual vitreous membrane, as in this combined retinal detachment case where residual membrane is identified during internal limiting membrane peeling, which requires removal with the aid of a forceps. Assessment of the residual detachment after fluid-air exchange can help in determining the adequate tamponade type. Intraoperative OCT allows to work and dissect near the retina without causing trauma to it. Live visualization of the retina by OCT prevents deroofing of the cystic spaces during membrane removal. Intraoperative OCT is an impeccable tool to assess surgical endpoint, especially while giving subretinal tissue plasminogen activator injection. For the treatment of acute subretinal hemorrhage associated with age-related macular degeneration, intraoperative OCT helps in identifying the potential site and the tissue plane for the injection, as well as the completeness of the procedure can be ascertained by visualization of the raised bleb as well as the fluid. During surgical treatment of large macular hole by free internal limiting membrane flap, non-displacement of the free ILM flap is ascertained post-fluid air exchange by intraoperative OCT, thereby preventing post-operative day 1 surprises. In a case of macular hole associated with retinal detachment, intraoperative OCT aids in assessment of macular hole size under PFCL. While the retinal graft is being swept to the hole, its anatomical orientation can be assessed in real time. Intraoperative OCT aids in atraumatic tucking of the graft margin into the macular hole. Position of the graft can be ascertained after fluid-air exchange by intraoperative OCT. In case of myopic traction maculopathy, resolution of traction component can be ascertained with the aid of intraoperative OCT. When autologous internal limiting membrane graft is used in the case of optic disc pit associated with macular detachment, intraoperative OCT aids in assessment of the optic disc pit as well as visualization of snugly fitted ILM graft after fluid air exchange. Intraoperative OCT as a diagnostic tool in pediatric patients as well as in cases of simple scleral buckling can also be used. Intraoperative OCT can be performed in pediatric cases while doing examination under anesthesia, as a non-invasive tool where retina is illuminated externally, allowing the visualization of the retina and successful image acquisition by intraoperative OCT. This allows the complete assessment of the posterior pole by the intraoperative OCT. While doing simple scleral buckling for retinal detachment, same technique can be utilized to assess subtle proliferative vitreoretinopathy changes as well as quantification of subretinal fluid, immediate post-subretinal fluid drainage, which is done externally. Other indispensable utility of intraoperative OCT includes assessment of the peripheral lesion, thereby aiding in formulation of a clinical diagnosis, as well as the assessment of the macular hole anatomy in a case with marked cataract during combined cataract and vitreoretinal procedure where preoperative assessment is not possible. Intraoperative OCT has the potential to become an indispensable tool for vitreoretinal surgeons. Intraoperative OCT has also bettered the understanding of the tissue behavior during various surgical procedures and thereby improving the predictability of surgical outcome. Like any new technology, it has its limitation, which requires further refinement. The limitation includes shadowing, need for repeated tracking of the area of interest, as well as limited resolution of commercially available intraoperative OCT to delineate ILM. This is an Advanced Eye Center Postgraduate Institute of Medical Education and Research Chandigarh presentation.
Thank you so much, Ramandeep. Any questions?
So did you have a shadow effect with the current generation of the intraop OCT? Is there like a shadow from the instruments that you get?
What we have is, this is the only model which is available, so we have shadowing with this. So it's only the green tip the Mohit showed with that case. With that there is no shadowing, but any instrument, other instrument will produce a shadow there. But we have to learn how to use it.
So one important thing, do you simultaneously see the Myers of the OCT and the structural OCT while you are seeing the surgical content? Like, is
yes, there's a learning curve. So it's not like I have switched on the MI OCT, I can't switch it off. When I require it, when I switch it on and do my ERM peeling and on, then I ask the person to switch it off. So I am seeing at the two faces, fundus there, horizontal line there and the vertical line there.
No, so is it inside the ocular itself?
Absolutely inside the ocular.
Okay, but is it superimposed on the surgical area or is it on one side?
It's superimposed on the surgical area. I mean, the macula is here, it's not superimposed on the macula.
That's what I wanted to ask.
Above the temporal arcade, the horizontal line, vertical line is on the nasal side to the disc.
Why I wanted to ask you that, see, when you are operating, you will be focusing on the area of interest, right?
Yeah.
So simultaneously to look at that and then to look at the...
Absolutely, it's a skill, you play PlayStation. So like we see those, I see my car, what speed it is going and everything.
So I think that improvement might be needed, like in the Varion or the Callisto, you have, like they are superimposed. Whatever you are doing, you are seeing the Myers on the surgery. So I think with the improvement in technology that can be overcome. I noticed that in the pediatric case, you had an inverted OCT image. Was that an inverted image that we were seeing?
Sometimes get inverted and just it's a Z-axis problem. That's
okay.
The thing actually.
Okay. And have you used it on the? Do you have 3D system also on this, or with the intraop OCT? Or
nowadays we're using it for 3D system also, but the compatibility is not good actually, because it's compatible for the analog microscopes.
Thank you so much. OMG, that's suprachoroidal silicon oil. Dr. Gupta is here. Without OMG, there is nothing, so Gupta is good.
It's basically a complication. How do we manage it?
It was another routine day at work when I had taken up a 40-year-old patient for surgery. He was
please jack up the audio,
lens
please.
And had a rheumatogenious retinal detachment with posterior PVR and choroidal detachment. I should have realized in the very beginning itself that this case will be different when I couldn't localize my infusion cannula in the vitreous cavity. It was in the suprachoroidal space. Keeping my cool, I carefully internalized it with the help of a 25 gauge MVR blade, taking care of not to touch the lens. I thought that the worst is over, and so it seemed so for most of the surgery. A complete pars plana vitrectomy with base dissection was done. Epiretinal membrane at posterior pole fold was negatively stained with retiblue dye and peeled with the help of Eckhart's forceps. Inferior retinotomy was done to remove the subretinal tissue and release the inferior folds. PFCL was injected to stabilize the retina, and then a 360-degree green laser retinopexy was done. PFCL silicone oil exchange through infratemporal cannula was started. I saw the first oil bubble come into the vitreous cavity, and then patients started complaining of extreme pain. I started seeing a mound rise infratemporally. I started to see red, hemorrhage. I started to sweat. I tried to see the cannula but could not visualize the tip. Oh my god, I realized that the cannula has gone into the suprachoroidal space and I have injected oil there. I thought all is lost. I tried to change the port from infratemporal to supranasal but still could not visualize the cannula. My mind started working on what options I had. Should I close for now and fight another day? Should I call for a backup? Can some other VR surgeon get me out of this? Should I still trust in my skills and character? Then it hit me like a brainwave, something which I had seen in my recent layer times. This was the time to recall something from the past.
The problem is when the capsule moves from an elliptical orbit to a parabolic orbit. There's no mathematical formula for that. As we can calculate launch and landing, but without this conversion, the capsule stays in orbit. We can't bring it back home.
Maybe it's not new math at all.
It could be old math. Euler's method.
Euler's method.
Yes,
That's ancient.
but it works. It works numerically.
That's it.
I asked for my 20 gauge 6mm sutured infusion cannula. We had not used it for long. Where was it? The OT staff went into a frantic activity. Will they find it? And yes, they did. I breathed a sigh of relief. I quickly removed 2 of my 23 gauge cannulas and put in a 6mm 20 gauge cannula. It was difficult to insert the cannula as the eye was hypotenuse. Because of the hypotony, the eye started to bleed profusely. For a moment, I thought I had an expulsive hemorrhage. With the help of a 25 gauge MVR, I carefully internalized the cannula in the vitreous cavity. With the pressure building up from the infusion, the silicone oil from the suprachoroidal space egressed from the other 20 gauge port. Blood was cleared with the help of a cutter. I could see a well-attached retina supported by PFCL and let out my first sigh of relief after long. Vitreous lavage was done for 10 to 15 minutes to clear the blood from the vitreous cavity. The clot seen inferiorly was then removed with the help of suction from the cutter. Carefully, I then completed my PFCL silicone oil exchange and closed my port. A major catastrophe had been averted. Post-op 3 months, the retina is well attached and the lens is still clear.
Oh my God, that is wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Gupta. I don't think we can have any questions on this case. May I call the next speaker? He had a question? 1 second.
Why 20 gauge cannula?
So basically, if we do 20 gauge, first thing I need a longer cannula so that it goes inside the vitreous cavity. And if I do a 20 gauge, that means the suprachoroidal space directly comes in communication with the outside atmosphere. So converting to 20 gauge means that I am also draining the suprachoroidal silicone oil. So until unless I drain suprachoroidal silicone oil, I am not going to settle the choroids which are there.
Okay, I think that's fine. The next speaker is Dr. Piyush Kohli, and he's going to tell us tips and tricks in VR surgeries. Over to Piyush.
For vitreoretinal surgeries, we have no financial interests. Mega V-swing for PVD induction. Induction of PVD is one of the most critical steps for the success of RD surgery. Failure to completely remove the vitreous can result in redetachments. Application of high volume active aspiration over optic disc margin is the most commonly practiced technique for PVD induction. However, in cases where posterior hyaloid is firmly adherent, this technique often leaves behind a layer of cortical vitreous. Removing the remnant vitreous in these cases is a big challenge and is often accomplished in small pieces. Removing vitreous with newer techniques using sharp instruments is potentially dangerous. We describe a novel technique, the Mega V-swing technique, to completely remove the vitreous in form of a single sheet. Vitreous is stained with triamcinolone acetate. PFCL is then injected on the posterior pole. The triamcinolone stained vitreous is gently stroked in a centrifugal manner with the help of a diamond-dusted scraper till a defect in the vitreous is noted. Stroking of the vitreous is continued around the defect in a centrifugal fashion so as to enlarge the defect to form a ring of 4 to 5 disc diameter size with rolled out edges. The sheet is then lifted from the edge of the ring using an ILM peeling forceps to induce the PVD. Once the edges of the ring are lifted, the potential space created between the vitreous sheet and the detached retina is automatically filled by the PFCL. This causes a gradual peripheral extension of the vitreous detachment in all quarters. Due to the cushion provided by the vitreous, a defect is easily made in it without damaging the retina. Enlarging the defect in the vitreous sheet makes its edge thick enough for the manipulation with an ILM peeling forceps. Unlike PVD induction with sharp instruments, it is possible to lift the vitreous sheet without going under it. This makes the technique safe in the presence of underlying mobile retina. Collapsing the eyeball to remove foreign body from the orbit. A patient presented with history of trauma with iron nail while working on a machine. On examination, the patient had VH. CT scan showed the foreign body in scleral coat much beyond the equator. One approach was to perform vitrectomy for the VH, and Orbit taught me to remove the foreign body. We performed vitrectomy to clear the VH. After thorough search, no intraocular foreign body was found. We filled the eye with PFCL and collapsed the eyeball by reducing the IOP. Localized conjunctival peritomy was done and the muscles were brittle. This provided adequate space for the removal of foreign body. Scleral plug for optic disc maculopathy. A partial thickness scleral plug was taken from the inferior sclera and snugly fit in the optic disc. Simple modification for 25 gauge trocar and cannula system for ROP related lens sparing vitrectomy. Invertent lens touch is a known complication in phakic eyes, especially small ROP eyes. We describe a simple and inexpensive technique to raise the 25 gauge trocar and cannula for using it in these premature newborn infants. A 42 silicon band 4 mm in width is cut at a distance of 2 mm and then split in the center to give two small 2 into 2 mm squares. 3 pieces are taken for each trocar cannula. Holding it at the tip, each 25 gauge trocar and cannula is pierced through the silicon piece and is then pushed till the hub of the cannula. Using light pipe as a second instrument as an alternative to bimanual surgery and Chandler. ILM peeling under PFCL. PFCL can be used as a surgical hand during ILM peeling in cases of retinal detachment as well as PDR. Under PFCL, the ILM can be peeled in spite of the boggy retina. Removing blood from inferior aura to prevent post-operative day 1 dispersed VH. The blood clots are meticulously cleared after indentation. Use of 1 ml saline to disperse the blood from the posterior pole. Vitrectomy with BBG negative staining. After staining with BBG, in case of full thickness macular hole, it requires 2 to 3 minutes for ILM to stain. During this time, instead of waiting, peripheral vitrectomy can be done. With negative staining of vitreous due to BBG, peripheral vitrectomy becomes easier. Thank you.
I would like to emphasize that
Yeah, please go ahead. You
the
have
mega
time.
V-stick that we have described, it is quite easy and quite reproducible even in people who are just naive and don't have much of surgical experience. And it is specially utilized, it works very well in pediatric RDs, in RDs that do not have any PVD, and even in diabetic vitrectomies in case of re-RDs. And so that scleral plug I would like to mention that we have recently published our results. The results of OD pit maculopathy are much better if we plug the OD pit with either ILM flap or the scleral plug rather than just doing a vitrectomy.
Perfect. I think these tips go a long way in making our life easy. Any other questions from the audience? I think I appreciate whatever you have shown.
Thank you, sir.
May I have the last presenter today, Dr. Surve? She's here. Yes, she's going to speak to us on glycerin-assisted vitreoretinal surgery in decompensated edematous cornea. Over to Dr. Surve.
In decompensated edematous cornea. A 63-year-old male patient had perforated corneal ulcer with lens extrusion 2 years back, for which therapeutic keratoplasty was done, but the patient was lost to follow-up. He presented to us with diminution of vision for last 8 months. He was diagnosed to have failed graft with aphakia with retinal detachment on ultrasonography. So what were the options we had in such a case? Repeat penetrating keratoplasty followed by vitreoretinal surgery after stabilization of the graft, or temporary keratoprosthesis assisted VR surgery, or endoilluminator assisted VR surgery. Here we see the cornea is edematous with thick epithelium and no prominent scarring is visible. As a standard procedure, 3 25 gauge ports were made, application of glycerin is being done and epithelium was debrided. There was some improvement, but you can still see centrally the media is still hazy. Further, instead of the usual viscoelastic agent, glycerin was used as a coupling medium. This allowed continuous interaction of glycerin with the edematous cornea and progressive improvement in the corneal clarity. As co-vitrectomy was being done, we observed that there was bullous retinal detachment and multiple subretinal band and subretinal sheaths were noted. For a subretinal band present posteriorly, a retinotomy was made using diathermy and the subretinal band was removed using the ILM forceps. Grasp and regrasp allowed complete removal of the band. Through the same retinotomy, fluid-fluid exchange was done to decrease the height of the retinal detachment. This allowed better visualization of the whole retina. This was the intermittent status of the cornea. Further, remaining subretinal band which were creating tautness of the retina were removed. Fluid air exchange was done to allow the retina to settle. The improvement in the media clarity allowed us to perform scleral indentation and visualize the periphery to identify for presence of any break. Here we noticed that there was a break present inferiorly near the ora serrata. This would not have been possible in a post-keratoplasty case where there is risk of breakage of sutures, wound dehiscence or displacement of graft. Glycerin has a rapid onset of action with resultant complete clearing of the corneal edema. This allowed us to perform various difficult procedures which included core peripheral vitrectomy, interface vitrectomy, identification of the tractional areas, removal of subretinal band, subretinal sheath and identification of the breaks. Further, laser of the break, the retinotomies and 360-degree laser barrage was also done. Oil was injected at the end of the procedure. As we see, we can observe the clarity of the posterior segment and the anterior segment at the end of the surgery. Back to the other procedure, there is no need to delay the treatment and the surgery can be performed in a shorter duration of time. The associated refractive disturbance, inflammation and risk of graft failure with other surgeries is also reduced. Also, there is no need of corneal tissue. The dependency on the availability of corneal surgeon is also decreased. This is especially important in areas where the availability of corneal tissue is a problem. Thus, it is an easier, cheaper alternative but requires an experienced surgeon. However, corneal scarring should be ruled out prior. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Surve. Can you just tell me how do you sterilize this?
So it is sterilized using autoclave. We get it from an eye bank where they
The
sterilize
glycerin?
it. Yes, sir. Even in it is used in culture mediums where
Okay.
it is also sterilized. 80% concentration is used over there.
Any other questions? Fine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
I thank the audience for being here with us all through. I think the results will be declared by the scientific committee, and we hope that the best video wins, the best presenter wins. Thank you so much.